right, well, let's get started. Might have a few other people joining, but I want to make sure we fill the full hour because we have a lot to talk about. So I want
Yes.
to thank you so much for being here. So excited to gather today and talk with you about the importance of getting your board ready for a capital campaign. My name is Sandra Davis, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm founder and president of Donorly, and Donorly works with small and mid-sized nonprofits at moments of growth and change to build their fundraising muscle using donor research, storytelling, and community building. And we especially love the growth and change moment of a capital campaign. So I'm really thrilled to draw on the wisdom and knowledge of Gary Bagley, executive coach and consultant. Gary, could you just tell us a little bit about you and the work that you do?
Hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here today, by the way, Sandra. Thanks for inviting me, and I hope to live up to your introduction. Um, I have been in practice as an executive coach and a consultant, dominantly to nonprofits and nonprofit C-suite leaders and to boards of directors for the past 3 years. Before that, most recently, I was in a role as executive director at an organization in New York City called New York Cares. So I try to combine the kind of the theoretical practice with the practical understanding of what it means to be someone who needs to motivate and work with a board. So that's what I hope to bring to you all today. And as you'll find out later, you can find me on just about any social media platform. You'll actually have a harder time avoiding me than finding me. So I'm excited to be here today.
No one's going to want to avoid you after this hour, Gary. That's great. Okay, so thank you for that. A little bit of housekeeping here, and then we'll get started. So, as a reminder, this call is being recorded, and if you want to turn on closed captioning, navigate to the meeting controls toolbar and click the show captions icon. Here's how it's going to work. We're going to be selecting a series of questions from those submitted in advance and spend up to 10 minutes on each question. If you submitted the question, we're going to invite you to come off mic, introduce yourself, name, your pronouns, title, and organization, and give us your question. And then if you didn't have time to submit a question, please go ahead and put something in the chat if you're thinking of anything that you want to ask now or at any point along the way. Our colleague Weston, can you wave Weston, is here today with us, and we'll be monitoring the chat. We'll try to work through as many questions as we can. And feel free to put follow-up questions and comments and responses in the chat too. We really would encourage you to be involved and lively in the chat. And our goal is to make this, educational for everyone involved, not just those in the hot seat. All right, so let's take the first question. Go ahead, Weston, take it away.
Thank you, Sandra. All right, I'm going to get started with our first question from Channing Grimes at Customs House Museum and Cultural Center. And Channing, I see you're here, so I'm going to invite you to come off mic. But in case you don't remember your question fully, I'll read it a bit, and then I'd love to hear some more context around it. So Channing asked, our board is very engaged in the boardroom, but out of the boardroom, they are not bringing in the money or the people, but that could also fall on us to where we might not be asking them to do enough. How much is too much? I think this is a big question. I'd love to hear more about your board and what's going on at your organization.
Thank you so much. My name is Chan Grimes, and my pronouns are she, her. And I'm so happy to be invited here by Rachel Katz. And it has been really great to get to know her. And it has been such a tough question for us to ask myself and the director. We've just been kind of bouncing back and forth with it. And Rachel really brought it to light the other day. And they are eager. They're eager in the boardroom, and they come to receptions that we have. They come to new exhibit openings, but that's about the extent of it. And is it something that we are doing? Are they talking about us when they're out and about because they are on other boards? They are active in the community, but I wonder, does it stop outside of the boardroom? And they're not, they volunteer, they seem to be philanthropic, and I wonder, what can we do to engage that, and is there a line that there's too much? So we're kind of at a pass of like, what can we do to get that engagement a little more?
It's such, thank you so much for that. It's such a good question, and it's such a perennial question, I think, both from staff and from board members themselves. I think board members, are really eager to help and need some direction sometime and need some help. And, board members are busy with their own lives, with their own careers and all of that. So trying to engage them in doing the day-to-day work of ambassadorship and fundraising, can be challenging. So I'm just acknowledging this is a classic kind of question and problem for every nonprofit. And there's a few ways, to work through it. Gary, do you want to jump in and
Sure. Sandra and I were chatting earlier this week and looking at some of the questions, and this is, as she said, it's a perennial question, right? And the conversation and level setting with a board of what their duties are and how they act on them is a constant conversation. It varies situation to situation, but often we find that telling a board what their job is always a no-win, because it starts with resistance. So when I work with folks, I find the biggest thing I work on is changing from kind of telling to influencing, to thinking, what techniques can you use with your particular board to invite them into the conversation. What's interesting is when I work with boards and I ask, how could you improve the board experience? Almost invariably, the number one thing they say is clarify expectations. They feel like they don't understand what is expected of them. Now, I should acknowledge that on the other side, I have a CEO, a development director going, we've told them this, right? So sometimes it's not that they haven't been told, it's they haven't heard it. And so there's a constant discussion. I will say sometimes too, and I don't know in everybody's situation, but often I also suggest working with a board to narrow down the activities, right? Because as Sandra said, like I come from a background of managing volunteers, and there is an argument that board service is the highest form of volunteer service you can do, meaning it's the most complex. Doesn't mean it's the most important, but it is the most complex. We ask so many things of a group of people who are not getting paid for it. So working with the CEO and board chair in particular to make sure they're in alignment about what the duties and responsibilities are, where are the priorities right now? And as Sandra and I were talking, and I'm sure she'll, speak to this more, is when you do take on major initiatives like a capital campaign, like a strategic plan, right? Invariably, you have to work with board leadership and staff leadership to narrow down the amount you're asking, right? Because these big initiatives often consume all the time somebody would even have for this. So those are a couple, I know those are sort of general principles, but we can get certainly more specific if it's helpful.
I'll get a little more specific. So one thing you said is that, CEOs and directors of development feel like they've said something, but it maybe hasn't been heard. I heard a statistic the other day that the maximum amount of information we retain from a conversation is 50%. So keep that in mind. It's probably in general less than that. If you have some expectations or some, questions or some instructions for your board member or for your team, remember, you probably have to repeat it a few times and maybe in a few different ways. People take in information in different ways as well, visually, verbally, in writing. So keep that in mind if you're wanting to make sure that you're inspiring people to do what you want them to do. One thing I would say is maybe you start small in your particular case, Channing, where you're just trying to make sure that your board is doing some things to activate the rest of the community. So let's say that it is yeah, asking your board members to invite people in their network to an opening or something. Give them very clear instructions and write an email template with some content for them. Ask them to send it out on X day, confirm that they sent it out to 3 people, like give some very, very specific instructions. You might even want to gamify it across the board. So you're asking the board to make a commitment as a whole to invite a total of 20 people or for each to invite 2, and then report out to the full board on who's doing the inviting. And I'd say that's a low bar thing to do. Everybody should have a couple of friends they can invite to something and get in the habit of that. The other thing I will say about something like that, I'm thinking about my company's experience around this hot seat coaching. So we've been asking the people on our team to make sure to invite our clients, make sure to invite their friends. And you were invited by Rachel, right? So the first couple of times this was asked of our team, there wasn't much traction, but last time a lot of people on our team reached out and made the time to invite other people that they knew or invite clients or former clients. So sometimes it just takes a few times before the engine starts to rev on those kinds of things.
I would add one thing to those great ideas. I'm remembering now, I would even go sometimes a step further and say to a board member, let me get your email list. And then I would say, may I invite these people, saying, Sandra has asked me to email you to invite you. Like, to really like break the task down to the very least thing they can do. And then I also think around fundraising, board management, there is, the art part of the art and science is sort of going, oh, I know they're up on Saturday morning, right? Like I know that's a time. And even if I schedule the email, right, to go out, but getting a sense of like, when do people give me this time and attention? Right? Like we sometimes think the small talk of like, oh, the kids are going to school and this one's taking soccer lessons, right? There's a lot of information in there, frankly, about when you can get them, right? And so kind of listening with an ear to like, when might their time and attention be available for me? And then can I accommodate that, right? Like you're talking to somebody who used to meet with his board chair at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning. So I had a kind of, I'll do anything. I don't expect everybody to be that person. But you can still schedule an email. You can do all sorts of different things. So just a couple specific things from my experience to add to Sandra's great ideas.
That's so good too, because ultimately that's an efficiency for you. Maybe not the 8 a.m. Sunday morning, but like,
Right.
if you know that you're going to send an email and you'll get a response, that's actually an efficiency for you. I love that tip. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Channing, for your question. I think that was a great conversation to get the ball rolling. With that, I'm going to move on to our next question. And I don't see Kathy Lofton on the call, but Kathy, if you're here under an alias, please come off mic. But Kathy asked a great question. Are board members obligated to fundraise? And this is a big one. Sandra and Gary, I think you're up for it.
It is a big one, and board members always ask it, staff members always ask it, and it is a frustration, I think, for a lot of people. And I have my personal point of view, and Gary, I want to hear yours. I feel very strongly that not every board member should be asked to solicit money. I think it's a conversation that you have to be willing to be vulnerable for. You have to be willing to maybe feel uncomfortable, and you have to be willing to ask for the amount of money that is the best option for your organization, and be brave about it. Not everybody's cut out for that. I would say that everybody could learn it and that everybody could enjoy it because it is a joyful process. But I recognize that that's not a journey every board member wants to go on. But I would say every board member has a role to play in the act of cultivating donors and stewarding donors, even if they are not there for the moment of the ask. What do you think, Gary?
I agree 100%. I will say one thing I often do when I'm working with boards is I expand the notion of fundraising and I really talk about how every board member is responsible for expanding the network of the organization and that will lead to the resources that come into it. Now, listen, that resource may be access to advice that you wouldn't get unless there was that connection. It may be money, it may be space, right? There's many kinds of resources that come in. The other thing I often do is I agree that not everybody's cut out to fundraise, but another actual practical exercise I've done with boards is I ask them to just come up with kind of three things that they can speak to about their organization. Not an elevator pitch, but sort of the why I love this organization, why I love it, right? What I
Mhm.
love about it, why I love it. And then we just practice these two or three sentences together. And I always give them the fourth sentence, which is, I'd love to introduce you to our executive director, right? Like that's
Right.
fundraising, right? Just getting somebody excited about the thing you love, and then you don't have to be the professional who thinks, am I asking for $5,000? Is this a $10 donor? Right? Hopefully your CEO or your chief development officer is the person with that savvy. And just to say, hey, can I set up time for us all to have a cup of coffee together? Right?
That's right.
That's fundraising. It's not all about, as you know, 90% of fundraising happens before the ask, right? And that's another part. Everybody's afraid of the ask, but there's all this other wonderful things that they can do to participate.
So much. That's so good. And just bringing it back to the idea of board members in the context of a capital campaign,
Yeah.
what you described, I think can come in really handy when you're doing some of the solicitation for transformational gifts, for leadership gifts, where you're
Yep.
doing it in person, and you may want a board chair or a board member and a staff member to be the team who's soliciting that gift. So the board chair's job or the board member's job might be to, tell that story, exactly what you said, Gary, about why you love this organization, what your dreams are for the future after this building is built or after this endowment campaign is completed, and why you're so passionate about it. And then you can pass off the conversation to the staff person who can make the ask. So that's a way that, board members might be expected to kind of step up and step into the idea of having these conversations during a capital campaign. And that's a really fun role to play because you're kind of elevating those conversations, getting people excited and energized and ready to lean in to the future of that organization, get them inspired to really consider a gift that's meaningful to them and that's meaningful to the organization.
That's great.
That was great. Thank you. I love that exercise of coming up with just a couple of sentences about what you love about your organization and so on. That's
Oh, I want to say one more thing. Rehearse these conversations with your board
Yes.
members and with each other. It doesn't come naturally, and the rehearsal actually can be really fun because
does
there's no stakes, but it's still nervous making, but definitely do go through some rehearsal.
Yeah, and I would say one thing I was going to chime in is to say, like, sort of for the nonprofit professionals that are on this Zoom, one thing I think we all know is very often a board member will come back with less money than you would have, right? Because they're coming over their own hurdles about what's the size of the ask, and if they're not comfortable with that, It's always disappointing to have somebody come back with $1,000 that could have been $10,000. So it's another reason to support them in their desire to expand this. You know how to set that level better than they probably do.
Thank you. Thanks, both. Okay, on to the next question. That's from Penny Harris, and I don't think Penny was able to join us today, but she had a great question. She's from Renewable Philanthropy, and she asked, talk about the relationship of the CEO with the board. How does one lead the boss?
Gary, I'm going to throw that right over to you because you've been on both sides of
Okay.
that game.
I was going to say, just to be clear, I teach a course on this, so I'll boil that down to 2 to 3 minutes. But one of the things when Sandra and I were talking about this in Weston, earlier this week, one of the things I said is like when we like zoom out of nonprofits and we look at just like what make like almost from a research perspective, what makes the best ones function the best they do. The number one criteria in the successful nonprofits is the relationship between the board chair and the CEO. The stronger that is, the better. And when you think about it, it makes sense, right? Like if we're aligned, like we can make this all work out. Second one is the CEO to the board of directors as a whole. And I always say, don't tell staff, like that's further down on the list, right? But this idea of being able to build the resource, the council, et cetera, really does define a successful organization. So there are a few things that successful CEOs tend to do that help their board. The first one is so obvious, but I can tell you in at least a third of the people I work with, it's actually not present, is successful CEOs actually like their board. They like them, they respect them, they see the value in having one. Right. So the CEO who says, like, just get them to write a check and stop bothering me, they're actually, sub-optimizing the value of their organization. So I always say, like, if you don't love them, like, think of this as a prearranged marriage because you're going to have to learn to love them, or you're going to have to turn them into someone you could love, which takes a lot of political skill, right? Like bringing in new people, engage, finding who you can gauge, etc. Um, as I was thinking, especially about like capital campaigns and bigger, um, sort of bigger endeavors, there's another thing that successful CEOs do, which is they provide their boards a lot of information.
Hmm.
Right. And they, as somebody refers to it, I love this, as great CEOs kind of lay a trail of breadcrumbs. Like they don't make it's kind of like fundraising. They don't make every ask right away. Right. It's sort of like they're always setting up, like I'm feeling this need. Do you agree? They're finding an article in the Chronicle of Philanthropy that said, oh, wow, this gave me a lot to think about. I thought I'd share this with all of you, right? Um, and there is this idea of information sharing and generating conversations. Another thing, I've got two more. I have about 30 more, but like when I thought about today, another thing that they do is they actually create relationships between board members, right? They become kind of the center of making this a strong and high functioning team, right? I always would say, like, when I really kind of embraced this as a strategy as a CEO myself, I'd be on a call with one board member, they'd say something, I'd go, oh, that reminds me a lot of a conversation I had with so and so. Maybe I should get all three of us together, like to chat about this, right? And they start to connect around what they're doing, what they believe in, and it can really it allows you at a certain point to allow the board to have a momentum to itself where you don't have to drive everything. But to be clear, you're kind of still the center of it, right? Like you created the relationships. And so there's not a sense of like the board talking behind your back. It's like they're engaging in a positive way that you've really directed them for. And then this last one, and I'm here to admit this was my weak suit. I needed to be surrounded by people who were better at it. But the CEO and the team really create structure for the board to operate within, right? Like whether it's committee meetings, in a capital campaign, the formality of do we have a capital campaign committee, right? How often do they meet? What is their purpose for meeting? How do they report back to the full board, right? Where is decision-making power? Those structures actually really matter. And ultimately, they're what lead to expectation setting, right? Like when you're level setting with a board, it's kind of the sum of all these structures and the responsibilities that come out of them. So that's like a few things. Like I said, and it's a those of you who are in the role or work directly with the CEO know it's a very complicated role. And one of the things that Sandra and I also talked about earlier this week is there's so much of the relationship with the CEO or with the board that the rest of your staff will never even see. Right? Like I'm seeing a few nods, right? Like there's like conversations. You're pushing 15 to 20 people in a direction. They don't all move at the same pace, right? So you have to have a large tolerance for bringing them along and knowing that, there are a lot of people who won't see that, but that it's a big chunk of your role. So anyway, that was a brain dump of 4 ideas.
We'll have to do a long form to get to the rest of the 30 or
Yeah,
join your class.
we'll have to do a day long or something.
It's great. It's so great. There's so much that you said that really resonates with me. It really is a complex relationship, and there's a lot of trust building that needs to happen that feels like a lot of work on both sides, but that has a payoff ultimately that is above and beyond all of the work that you need to do. And I would say in the context of a campaign, as you're thinking about going forward with a campaign, I would say, take a second look if you feel like there is a lot of or lack of trust or a lot of confusion or a lot of difficulty around your relationship with the board or the cohesiveness of the board, because I think that you want to make sure that that board is 100% behind that campaign, not only 100% in terms of their giving, which is a really important aspect of starting a campaign, because that's a message you're giving to the rest of the world that our board, who knows all of the details of this organization, is committed 100% to this campaign, but also make sure they're committed to the concept, the goal, the idea of building that building or the idea of expanding your services, and they're all marching forward in the same direction. And one of the things we also talked about earlier this week was the idea of like the formality of a board resolution around a campaign. And Gary was saying in a way that's kind of just a ritual, but then we got to talking about how important those rituals are, how important it is to put that stuff on paper, to have an actual vote that means something to people, and it codifies and makes it official, so that when people start to get skittish, which they will, because you're taking on a big project, you can take everybody back to that moment of we all agreed to this and we're moving forward and we'll work out the problems we're going through right now, or the surprises that are coming up along the way. But we all agreed we would take this on. Let's keep moving forward.
Yeah, agree 100%. One other thing I would say that I underestimated at times is because, by the way, I've seen so many large endeavors, whether it's a capital campaign, a strategic plan, anything, and all of a sudden you're 3 months in and somebody on the board's like, wait, what are we doing here? Right? And you're like, so the other thing in addition to kind of making it official, again, like forming a committee, making sure that's in the minutes of the board meeting, right? On the way up to adopting something, is I started paying more attention to the people who hadn't been at the meeting. and saying, setting the date next day, saying, sorry, you couldn't be there last night. Can we schedule 15 minutes in the next couple of weeks so I can catch you up on the conversation? Because, it's ironic, but it's the person who wasn't at the meeting who then often questions the decision of the group, right? And so I realized like every 15 minutes I spent reaching out to the people who hadn't attended saved me hours in the
Mm,
future.
that
So
is really good advice. I think that one other thing I want to say is in the process of embarking on a campaign or some other big project, you can expect um, that board members are going to take that moment to exit. And you can, and so just be prepared for that. But you can also expect that some board members are going to step up in a way that they never have before because they're really excited about it. And then you can expect to be able to attract new board members along the way, even when you're in the midst of a campaign and the giving expectations might be very high. So there will be a little bit of, kind of wobbliness, and that may feel very disconcerting from a leadership role. You feel like you're losing people, or something must be going wrong if that's the case. But the truth is that that is a natural result of change, of making change. Some people aren't there for it.
now, at risk of just riffing off of that, one of the old rules of board management that I remember hearing was think of your board in thirds. A third of them, and if you think about your own board, they probably fall into this. About a third of them are like really high performing. You hope they'll never leave you. About a third of them are just a little checked out, right? Not necessarily for bad reasons. Sometimes there's other things happening. And then there's the third in the middle who could kind of go either way. And I often say, like, a lot of people focus on the third that are checked out, right? Like they're understandably frustrated. It's the middle third is the place to put your attention,
Mm.
right? These folks could go either way. So steward them toward the top, not allow this to be a time they check out. Some of the people are going to check out no matter what you do. And so kind of figuring out who are those people who are on the fence and how can you and your board president work together to deepen the engagement is often the stronger, is stronger. And I'm a firm believer that if those who leave open space for you to bring in better people, that ultimately that's the right thing to do. So.
That's so good. That's so good. Reminding everybody on the call, if you want to throw a question in, we have a few more minutes. We have plenty of questions to deal with, but throw a question in or a comment in to the chat if you can think of anything. I'll throw it back to you, Weston.
Yeah, you beat me to it. I was just about to give that little reminder. That was such a great conversation. I just kind of let it keep going because so many good notes there. All right. We have a question from Penelope at Emerging Public Leaders who asked, if the board chair is about to make a sizable gift, how can we use that as leverage with other board members or board members' contacts? And I don't think that this is just a board chair. I think there could be a board member about to make a sizable gift. I'm curious, Gary and Sandra, what you might recommend.
And Penelope is not here today, right? I wanted to ask her a little more about that.
Right.
But there's so many ways to leverage a gift like that. And of course, you want to do it in collaboration with the person who's making the gift. You have to, draw on their comfort level around maybe the gift being a challenge or maybe it being a gift that is used to inspire participation from the rest of the board. And I always find in those cases, you've got to have a good conversation with the donor to kind of brainstorm and come up with some good ideas about how you might leverage it. I think, Gary, you mentioned like some concerns that people might have about a big gift in comparison to what other people can do. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and interestingly, it dovetails with this question of leadership, right? Like
Mhm.
most board presidents are aware that they're holding the position of power. And so to do that and then make a big public financial donation sets a certain tone, right? And they'll want to navigate that, and you'll want to navigate that carefully. Um, I think also, it's hard if your board president steps up and makes $250,000 gift, and there you have folks on your board who can do $1,000 or $2,000, right? And your job is, of course, to make every donor feel good about the level at which they can donate, right? So I'm a big fan of saying before you announce, sit with the board president and really think about like this is what the board can do. I also found, by the way, always amazed, my board president knew exactly what everybody at that table could do financially. In some ways, I didn't know, right? Because he understood like what job they were in, and they were like, oh, yeah, no, 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 they have more money, right? Where others, like I was impressed by the title, and he was like, I think you're aiming a little high there, Gary, right? So, finding a way to discuss with the board chair, how can we use this as motivation without shutting down the many ways people contribute, right? One thing I would do, I did this, by the way, with incoming board members. We had a $50,000 give get. That was our goal. And I always said my job was to come to the nominating committee to explain how this person would add at least $50,000 of value to the organization, right? Now, that might be cash and it might not be cash, but everybody sitting here should feel like they are contributing that much in terms of either their skill, their knowledge, their network, or their fundraising. So I really encourage people at when they're thinking about leveraging a gift is just remember there are many dynamics to resource building and figure out a way you can leverage the gift to kind of ignite that entire range of giving, not maybe just the cash gift. So that's
That's such a good point to really think about and place a value on or some way to measure non-cash contributions. So if somebody on your board is bringing a skill set that has an hourly value associated with it, you could value it based on the number of hours they're providing, pro bono legal
yep.
service to you, for example, because you would have to pay for that if you don't have a board member who can do that legal work for you. So acknowledging that that has real value because it does to the person who's providing it
Yep.
is another way to kind of maybe level set around various board members, cash ability to make a sizable contribution and ability in cash and ability to make a sizable contribution in their skills. And in a capital campaign, there are certain skills that are so valuable in
Yep.
terms of real estate and being able to navigate challenging zoning issues. And there are just so many skills that might not come into play in the day to day
Yep.
that could save the organization hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that's another way to kind of look at how people are contributing to what you're doing.
And it can be a way to roll up kind of like when you're putting together a plan for something like a capital campaign, it can be helpful to say like, here's cash, like this board is like providing X amount in legal services, X amount, like putting a dollar amount on that may be tough. But I do think it helps everybody see all the ways that board members need to contribute in this moment as well.
That was
Love
great.
that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to turn our attention to a question in the chat. And Ryan, I'd love for you to come off mic or on mic and talk a little bit about your question with Sandra and Gary.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm leading an endowment campaign, which is similar to a capital campaign, but different motivation a little bit. And I've found that the board's very excited about this campaign, but their board members are coming to me and the chair of the steering committee for the campaign and telling us what they're going to pledge, which is fantastic. Everyone loves a pledge, but in most cases, they've been smaller than what we would have hoped they would give. And so we're in this awkward position where we're grateful, of course, but I also want to say, like, can we discuss this? Can we talk about a different pledge? And I know this is going to be a campaign that goes on for a couple of years. So for some of them, I'm thinking, okay, we'll take their pledge in the first year. Next year, I can go back to them and say, we're almost at our goal. Can you help us? Can you double your pledge and, get us closer to the finish line? But I
Well,
don't, I want to prevent the others from coming to us too
yeah.
quickly.
Yeah, I hear you, Ryan. I think this
Yeah.
happens so often. Um, Question for you. Has your chair has made a gift?
Um, yeah, so our board chair is also sort of acting as co-chair for the steering committee.
Uh-huh.
We're trying to find another co-chair, but that's a different story. Um, he has made a gift, but he hasn't announced that to the rest of the board. We're planning to do that at the next full board meeting in early December. And we also I'm working on solidifying a lead gift for the campaign. And
Mm-hmm.
the idea was to wait until that lead gift has been pledged and then go to the board with all this excitement and enthusiasm with the announcement of what the board chair is giving and that we will be talking with you individually about what your pledge will be. But we haven't said that yet. So that's why we're getting all these preemptive pledges.
Okay. And then do you have a kind of a goal within the goal for the board only,
I have a goal.
but they don't
Um,
know?
the yeah, I have a goal in my mind. I've shared it with the board chair. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if I think it's higher than what I think he's a little frightened by it. That's okay. But yeah, I have a goal. It's 500,000 for the board. And
Okay.
we're leading a $6 million campaign, not a huge campaign, but for my organization, that's big.
Yeah. And back of the envelope, that feels like a reasonable goal for the board. Gary, do you have questions?
Uh, well, I'd love to hear. I don't have any more questions, but I do have thoughts as always. But
Okay.
I'd love to hear yours because this is, your territory for sure.
I mean, it's tricky because as you say, like you want to be thankful and you should be thankful. But if it's not, it may be too late, but for the next one that comes along saying like, I really appreciate you reaching out about this, but if we could just, wait on this conversation because we have some news coming up and then we'll be ready to have this conversation with everybody on the board. But I don't want to kind of preempt that news. And, that may or may not work. They may say to you, well, look, I already know I'm going to give 25,000 or whatever it is. And you could even say like, that's really great to know. We'll formalize that, when we're ready to start soliciting or having these conversations with the board. And then you can come back to them because they haven't made it official yet and say, we wonder if you might consider, a $50,000 gift. And remember, you can pay it over X number of years because that always helps people understand how they might be able to, see their way to a little bit bigger gift. Um, I guess I've never done this before, but it makes me wonder in retrospect if part of the announcing the campaign or agreeing on the campaign in the boardroom is to kind of tell the board, here's the rules of engagement. We're not ready yet,
Right.
but we'll come to you so that they don't preempt it.
Yeah, I would agree on that one. I think, in the spirit of like having done this very badly and a couple times better than badly, when the board president announced at the board meeting, Gary's going to be in touch with everybody over the next month to talk about your giving, for the coming year, and basically said, and I expect you to take his call in a smoother way than that. Then this kind of thing was less prominent as an issue. I
Mhm.
would say these are hard conversations to reopen, but I have had a couple people who then go, wait a minute, like I gave you 10,000 and everybody else was doing whatever amount. Like you were like, now I'm embarrassed, right? And of course you say we can, assuage your embarrassment easily right now. Um, Visit our website. But I do think that my instinct would be either for your board chair, uh, if they're comfortable, or you to say, hey, we're going to be making a big announcement in a couple of weeks. I'm very grateful for the gift, right? I'm very grateful. I want you to know, like, what this announcement is going to be because your gift is kind of framed within that. And so I just want to make sure, if this is the amount, I'm incredibly grateful. I also want you to know it's going to be part of kind of a bigger announcement and see if they still feel comfortable about it.
Yeah.
But I sometimes find, by the way, that that's a good conversation board president to donor because
Yeah.
one of the things I often said was hard about being an executive director is it's really hard to say, here's what I need you to do. Oh, by the way, thank you for the $100,000. Now, like, get back to work or in X number of ways. And so it is a place where the partnership with the board president can allow it so that you don't have to navigate this, like I'm asking you for so many kinds of things.
Mhm.
And I don't, and it prevents you from looking ungrateful
Mhm.
if you
Mhm.
can do it. If your board president is willing to do that.
And that's where campaign co-chairs or campaign chairs can come in and play that role as well. That's a perfect role for them. Is that helpful, Ryan?
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I see opportunities for openings in these conversations that you just talked about. So
Oh, good.
it's very affirming. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. It is 1:49 Eastern. There's a big question in the chat. I'm wondering, Gary, Sandra, if you can offer any quick items for Elisa's question, which is, what if the board chair is the one who is part of the quote unquote checked out third of the board? Any immediate tips?
Elisa, Gary, I'm going to let you answer that one.
Yeah, this is one of the hardest ones
Yep.
that you face because despite their being checked out, there's still a power dynamic that they're the one in charge, right? So there's a big risk to looking like you're working around them, right? Although you still have to do it, right? Like you, you just don't want to look like you're doing it. Um, and so your ability to find the momentum where you can find it, right? Which might be amongst non-chair board members, right? And then and again, you have to gauge where you have the trust, right? I often say one big mistake I see executive directors make when they're new is assuming that they are trusted because they got the job. You are not trusted. Like you haven't gotten that yet. And trust develops slowly, right? So, you have to actually time this carefully, know that you have some kind of social capital with some board members and I always say never confide in a board member that your board chair is a disappointing chair, right? Like that's just career suicide, right? What you need to do is to say, hey, listen, I'm trying to have this same conversation with so and so, whoever the board chair is, would you be comfortable if I raise this at the next board meeting? Because I think your thoughts are very helpful, right? And so, sometimes you can try to work to build momentum around that board chair. And then I do think it's for the CEO to have a one-on-one conversation. I was always lucky that I had strong board chairs, right? So I was always lucky in that regard, but they were busy people, right? And I do remember with my first board chair, there was a moment when she basically said, listen, I'm never going to be engaged in April and May, and here's why, right? So let's like plan ahead, let's plan after. So always my conversation was about, how can I support you in this? How can I support you in XYZ? And then the last thing I would say is, the one extent to which I would say maybe I would call it almost like a truth-telling kind of moment. Um, I remember I bumped into an issue with one chair where I felt like we were coming out of the meeting not certain about our next step, right? But the goal had been to come to a decision, right? So I would say, hey, listen, I was really hoping to come out from that meeting with a decision, right? So in the next meeting, I would really be pretty clear about like this is what I'm hoping will come out of this meeting, right? I remember one wonderful committee member said to me, go into every board meeting and imagine there's a resolution. Like at the end of the meeting, I'm going to take a resolution. The board will do this, this, and this. And it may not need to be a resolution, but then make sure with your board president that you agree at least on that, so that isn't up for debate in the room. So anyway, that's a few ideas. It's a really hard one.
It's a hard one.
Um,
Elise, I see you on camera. Any follow-up questions or anything to say?
No, I appreciate your answer. I think it's a tricky situation. And I will say that in my particular situation, our board chair is more recently becoming more engaged for some reason on his own terms, I guess. But sometimes it's um his perception of like a fundraising campaign is let's get everybody in town to donate $2. It's like an offering, pass the offering plate or
right.
a bake sale or a golf tournament. And I'm at a hospital, so we need more than like a golf. We need more than a bake sale here. We need
Right.
some significant like strategy and bigger. I'm trying to encourage like let's think bigger. Let's think like strategic. And anyway, so it's it's a challenge because at times he uh I don't know, just it doesn't see the vision and doesn't feel like he needs to do anything about it. So
Mm.
Hard. It's really hard. I think some reading and some training around how a campaign works that really does require those leadership gifts and transformational gifts. Sure, you can do the bake sale too, but that's at the very end, or the golf tournament. But you really need the other pieces, or it's just that it doesn't math out, you know?
I was gonna ask if you don't mind if this group has any maybe books or recommendations of resources that I've actually been kind of searching on Amazon while I was listening. What I know enough to know that there's skills required, but we don't have expertise in our organization from a fundraising background. So I don't know. Our board is open to some education, and so I've been doing some research on resources. If there's a book or article, I know Dornerly has some good resources online, but anyway, if anyone else has any favorite books that they've found to be helpful, maybe
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yeah, put those in the chat, everybody, if you have a favorite book. We can add some resources in our follow-up email as well, some books and blog posts and such. And I'm sure you have lots of great resources as well, Gary.
Yeah, I have to admit, like nothing is like jumping to mind. I have some kind of more academic texts on like just board management, but I would say certainly Donerly. I also think, when you're thinking about structure and like just bringing a board along, board source has a lot of good advice on structures and like what does a development committee do. Um, and one thing I would say, and maybe it states the obvious, but one of the challenges of board management is we get them wherever they are, and then we have to figure out how to bring them along, right? And so sometimes we're getting cues that the thing we want to do is going to be a year in the future, 2 years in the future, et cetera. And our best strategy is to figure out how do we lay the groundwork rather than start something before it's ready, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes
So,
complete sense. Okay, we're just about at the hour here. Thanks for sharing those resources in the chat. We'll add those in our
yeah.
follow-up
Oh,
email. I love Laura Fredericks, but
yeah.
I have some more reading to do from what Ryan and Lauren shared, so I'm excited about those new resources for me, and we'll share a blog post or two. So let's wrap it up. So I just wanted to kind of take a minute and share where we can connect. You can connect with me and my team on donorly.com. On social, we're @_donorly on all the usual platforms, and I'll share my LinkedIn and a follow-up email or maybe in the chat here. And Gary, where is it that people can find you?
You can find me, Gary Bagley, on LinkedIn. I also have a website, Gary@GaryBagley.com. By the way, that earlier kind of formula I gave to like getting board members to tell the story, that's a blog post that I wrote. It's called, ditch the pitch, ditch the elevator pitch, do this instead. So if you're interested, if you go to GaryBagley.com, you can see I focus a lot of my blogging on how to manage board relationships and how to manage the executive role. So feel free to follow there.
And do follow Gary on LinkedIn. He's always got a good post or two. It's a lot of fun
Thank
to
you.
interact with him on LinkedIn and with all of his other followers too. So he's a good follow.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll send all of that information in an email. We'll send these resources. Feel free to share additional resources with us. It's always good to have those available. This was such fun, as always. We always
Yeah.
love these. I look forward to these the whole month. It's just so much fun to have these conversations. I hope it's helpful for all of you. These are big topics. We skim the surface in a lot of ways, but I do think it's really just so helpful to get together and talk through these things. And thank you for being brave and bringing your questions. Our next hot seat coaching session is not until January. We're going to skip December. It's a busy month. We will be, our co-host will be Ted Stevens with the NewMad Group. And that's going to be on Friday, January 31st at 1 p.m. And we're going to focus on the topic of building a capital campaign case study. So thank you all for being here.
Yes.
Thank you for bringing your questions. Thank you, Gary, for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you for inviting me. It's wonderful conversation.
All right, take care, everyone.
Be well, everybody.
Thank you.